Hallo alle zusammen, herzlich willkommen zu unserem Clonakilty Livestream heute Abend. Ich freue mich sehr, sind schon einige da und seit langem mal wieder 2 Livestreams in einem Monat. Wir werden versuchen, das jetzt wieder konstanter zu machen und mehr Livestreams für euch zu planen, weil wir haben doch einige Neuheiten und in Irland passiert hier auch im Moment so viel und so vieles los, dass es sich dann doch lohnt, öfter einen Livestream zu machen und euch ein bisschen zu informieren, was gerade so im Irish Whisky Market los ist. Ja, und heute Abend freue ich mich. Hello, welcome you here to our live stream. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Maybe you can tell us a bit about you, what you're doing at Clonakilty, and why are you the perfect match to be here tonight for showcasing the whiskies?
Yeah, so my name's Oisìn Mulcahy, as I'm sure you introduced me. I'm head distiller and blender at Clonakilty Distillery, so I'm probably, I suppose, the person with the most hands-on impact on the whiskey that we're about to taste. I've kind of been with the distillery for the past 2 years. Before that, I'd worked in a number of other distilleries in Ireland, Dingle Distillery and Killarney Brewing and Distilling Company. So I kind of, over the past 2 years been kind of delving into the products that were already port cask and double oak already were kind of established products for Clonakilty, but I've kind of been lucky enough to add my own touch to them. And of course our single pot still, which we released this month as well, which I've had a big part in kind of taking from its conceptual phase into the actual release. So that's my background, shall we say.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so I think the podcast always has a special story in Germany, and maybe you don't know this. So when Clonakilty was first up and said, okay, we have our podcast finished whiskey, there was one cask which was too dark, it was too red, and the American market didn't wanted this. So Michael came to me and asked me if we want to have it for Germany, and we were like, yes, that's the right color for Germany. These bottles are really rare now, and some people are looking really for them because the taste was also really good. So Clonakilty podcast has a really special German story here.
It's funny, the color. We've gotten in trouble. I wouldn't say in trouble, but I remember a story before about port and the color. Obviously, it's natural color. Everything's always natural color. We don't add any colors usually to our whiskies. So sometimes you get unusual color, which is just the port cask is particularly active. It gives you such a dark color that Revenue and other people have been kind of questioning us. They're saying, oh, you've added something to that, you've done something to that, and we've been fully assured them that everything is natural. And sometimes you do get incredible color from port casks, especially tawny ports, and they're really special. I think it's a color you can't emulate in any other way because it's that beautiful strawberry kind of plum color.
Yeah,
it's really nice.
Yeah, so Julia Nune is looking here. The color was unbelievable. She was at Michael. She was at the distillery because on the first batches she helped Michael to find the right cask. So they both gave me a call and said we have something special. So yeah, the color was great, and you get it. Like I was one of the lucky ones who got one of these bottles. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I think we still come across, there was a couple of port casks, and in most cases, almost 90% of what we filled in the early days was ex-bourbon barrels, like most distilleries. But every now and again, probably because of a shortage of ex-bourbon barrels at the time, just when COVID kicked off. I think Paul, my predecessor, was forced to kind of fill some second fill port casks that were lying around. Which is amazing because now that they filled them out of kind of necessity, I get to enjoy them now because they're literally been filled for the last 4 or 5 years, which is something that's, a lot of distilleries, they don't, they usually finish things, so a year max, and then they take it out. Whereas I love to put things in, new make into casks and see how because the flavors that develop when you put new make into a cask versus when you just finish it is a totally different experience. So I've been looking forward to kind of finding those 1 or 2 casks that were filled 5 years ago, and kind of seeing how they're getting on. And port casks were one of them, because we had a port cask skew at the time. There was a lot of second fill, third fill port casks lying around that we filled with new make, and I think it's really, really enjoyable now, because we can actually reintegrate them back into port cask, kind of into the blends into the future, which was never really the plan initially. It was just out of necessity to fill this. But the color is amazing, because even with a second fill or third fill port, you tend to have to leave them longer to color to develop. So it worked out very well.
Wow, yeah, then we are really looking forward to it. That sounds good. Yeah. So we want to try 3 of your whiskeys tonight, and so I did the choice because I think it's interesting to talk about the port cask and the double oak, because, as you said, you changed the whiskeys, and also maybe we can talk a bit about the bottle design changed, and the package changed, and everything has a reason. So maybe we can talk maybe at first about the whiskey, what you changed, why you did that, and I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, of course. Like, I think so too, and I was kind of very lucky to take a product that was already like well established, like the port cask we've been releasing long before my time as a kind of as a core blend. But it tended to, and this was the plan from initially, was that batch to batch it would always change. There might be slight changes in the casks that were used. It always had a port component, obviously, but at the time they were sourcing grain. We always source grain. Clonakilty cannot produce grain whiskey ourselves. We don't have the column stills. But in the initial versions of the blend, it was always a malt grain blend, roughly 50-50 in most cases. But the source of that grain and that malt might change batch to batch. And the earlier batches might have had, 5-year-old, 6-year-old grain, but then might go back to a 4-year-old or 5-year-old. And you just had that variability. You also had different cask finishes, or different lengths of time in the port casks, and a different ratio between the ruby and the tawny port. And I think that in the early days, there was a lot of experimentation and trying to find the sweet spot when it comes to that product. And I think when I came in, out of necessity, as well as kind of standardizing the blend, was a kind of an important task, because it was becoming more and more popular, and the way in which we were producing it in the past wasn't sustainable into the future. So the scale at which we were producing it now meant that the way we filled casks, the way we created the blend, needed to kind of change without compromising on the quality or anything like that. And it coincided with a kind of a shortage and a kind of a belief amongst the distillery, really, that our own pot still was now turning 4. It was maybe 3.5, 4. And we knew that our own pot still, our 100% pot still, single pot still whiskey was around the corner. But we also felt that we had a whiskey that was good enough, certainly good enough to go into a blend. And I think we were kind of the opinion that if we can make it ourselves, we want to make it ourselves. We don't want to source it. So the malt component, we were thinking, you know what, there's a well-established tradition of grain pot still blends out there. Anyone who's tasted a Powers whiskey would be familiar with that. And I've always been of the opinion that a grain pot still blend is actually superior to most malt grain blends. I think that if you have a really good quality grain, and even a young pot can cut through. Like, if you have a somewhat mature grain whiskey, good quality grain, it can balance out the youthfulness of the pot, but yet the youthfulness of the pot still will actually help to kind of make the blend a little bit more exciting, because the problem with grain tends to be grain and malt. They tend to be quite one-dimensional in lots of cases, because they don't have the depth of flavor. So I think when we made the decision to introduce our own to essentially remove the malt component and integrate our own pot still into the blend. I think that was a big step. And it was kind of a risky step too, because we thought maybe people mightn't like it, or if they were used to the previous blend. But one of the lucky things we had is that we had that variability batch to batch, and that was kind of baked into the whole marketing behind it. We were like, okay, this may change batch to batch, but because we now have supply of our own, we have control over the supply of our own pot still. We can now begin to standardize that blend and make sure that, if people like port cask, that's the same quality they're going to get in the next batch and the batch afterwards. I'm always a little bit frustrated when I try a whiskey I love and then I go back and I try the next batch and it's not the same. It could be better, which is good, but it could be actually worse as well. And it's very frustrating, It's one of those.
Sometimes it can just be really various, so it's not better or
Exactly.
As you say, I think when you have a standard whiskey, you really want to have it consistency. Yeah. And it's true, because we open a lot of Clonakilty bottles for trade shows, and it often tastes different than we expected. So we often had to try the whiskey on the show so that we can really offer it to the people, because it's different than the last batch. So
I think a lot of, I suppose, craft distilleries, I don't think we consider ourselves a craft distillery, but I think maybe in the early days that was a kind of a title that a lot of distilleries would like to use. And I think that kind of, when you mature as a kind of a business, I suppose, and as a distiller, you're aiming you want to remove the variability, because the skill, as far as I'm concerned, in doing what I do is consistency and repeatability. If you can't repeat it, then it's a fluke. If you get a really good whiskey one batch and then you can't do it again, that's not a very good sign from our perspective. And I think the early days was a lot of experimentation. I think difficulties with COVID and trying to source casks, trying to source those other things meant that naturally there was variations in the blends from batch to batch. And I think, we're now getting to that stage where we have control over the supply of grain, we have control over the supply of pot still, and we're building into our 5-year plans. Like all the liquid in all our blends will be a minimum of 5 years. There won't ever be an age statement on them, but that'll be the minimum standard. So that means we can plan into it in advance. We can fill the casks. We can fill new make into port casks, so that in 5 years' time we have the depth of flavor that you'd expect from a 5-year-old port, exclusively port finished whiskey.
Great. Are you allowed to tell us from where the grain is? We have the question here.
I actually can't, but I can tell you that we have sourced. We don't source from West Cork. I can tell you that.
That's good.
Yeah, we don't.
I think that was the main question.
Yeah. No, we have usually sourced from G&D up until now, and a lot of our blends will have been exclusively G&D with grain wise. But we have other supplies coming downstream, which I think will slightly replace the G&D, but I can't say any more than that, I'm afraid.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
It was just a question, and So, okay, Tina, we had your podcast the first time at our Irish Whiskey Weekend last November, so she has a sample of it, so we can try it together. I think it's. I know it. I have tasted it before, and I think that the pot still gives the whiskey really more depth than just the single malt. I think it makes the complete blended whiskey more complex with much more flavor. So for me personally, I think it was a really good decision to do the pot still instead of the single malt of the whiskey. Yeah.
I think I agree. I think that the blended whiskey as a category is something that I don't think is getting enough respect. I think up until recently, blended whiskey is all about Jameson, and it's the cheapest thing you can make. You just throw it into a cocktail, or you throw it into a Coke or whatever. And it doesn't
Yep.
matter what the quality is, but I think, from a blending perspective, I love to mess around with not just different cask types, different flavors, but different liquid types as well. I'd love to see a blended pot still category emerging in Ireland, and like they have a similar blended malt category in Scotland. And I think blended whiskey as a category gives you just so much to play with, especially when you have a really good grain supply. Because single grain, we used to have a single grain core product as well, which was really good. And I think single grain's another thing that is, growing in appreciation, but before was just considered the lesser brother to malt and pot still. But I think blended whiskey gives you just so many potential flavor components that just needs to be appreciated a bit more. And I think pot and grain just work so well together because, and especially like I said, young pot will really help to cut through that sort of base, that grain base that kind of is quite one-dimensional, like I said. So it's really, I think it's an interesting kind of take on blended whiskey.
Yeah, definitely. I had the chance to try to blend whiskeys in Ireland. And after that experience, I can say every blend is much more difficult than a single malt.
Yeah.
I really go for the blend category because it's so hard to blend a whiskey really good. And what you would like to do is to give the consistency of that every batch tastes nearly the same. That's even harder to do. So yeah.
Yeah, you really have to know your ingredients. You've got to know, but consistency is about planning. It's about strategy. It's one of those things that unfortunately isn't as kind of interesting for most people. Like everyone, when you talk about blending, is interested in the casks. They're interested in the beakers and all the fancy things that kind of go along with it. But consistency is about planning. You need to make sure that you fill at the same time every year, that you empty at the same time, that you can keep to a consistent cask policy, wood policy, all those kind of things. And those are the kind of things that, isn't as interesting for everyone to know, but they're the kind of things that go on in the background to make the product consistent over time.
Yeah, that's right. Great. So just one more question for me. So I got it right that it is Ruby and Tawny podcast you're using for that one.
Yeah. So roughly the blend kind of breakdown is about 60% ex-bourbon, almost all kind of ex-bourbon, and then we have about 40% split between Tawny and Ruby port. Ruby port makes up the bulk of that. We kind of tread lightly with the Tawny port because it kind of, I think with the current youthfulness of the pot still that's in there, certainly for the first batch or second batch is getting older and older now, but we didn't want to have too much on the back end, shall we say, so we already have quite a spicy finish from the pot still coming through. And I think too much of a Tawny port can have a drying effect on the palate as well, and a little bit more dark chocolate and sort of those leathery notes, which I didn't want to overdo. So we tend to go on a kind of 2-to-1 ratio in a Ruby and Tawny port, maybe even a 2-to-1.
Yeah, great. So, and then it has a drinking strength. And you always have the 43.6%. So the really special ABV.
Do you know what? There's a story behind that. It's the minimum ABV that we've done tests on that we don't have to chill filter it. So it just happens to be at 43.6. We have a tolerance of 0.2 above or below, but we tend to keep that always above because it is 43. A non-chill filtered whiskey at 43 is kind of pushing it. It's close to the point where you'd have to, where it might go cloudy on you. So it's very important that that product is a non-chill filtered product. So it needs to it was the ABV that made the most sense as far as that. It seems very specific, but that is what we kind of found worked best.
Yeah, great. Okay. So we have the second blend, and I have to say that it is not yet available here, but it will be during the next days. It was on our last pallet. Yeah, it's not in the online shop yet, but it will be there in the next few days. So it's like, yeah, first, and it's, you see the bottle is closed. It's the first time for me that I try this. So I will open the bottle now. So this is the double oak. And as the name is saying, you're using two kinds of oak. So maybe you can tell us about what you're doing there.
Yeah, so in theory, we actually kind of use, well, I suppose it's two varieties of oak, European and American oak. There's actually three different types of cask types, I suppose. You have your ex-bourbon backbone, shall we say. Most of our blends kind of make up that. And then you have about a even split of virgin American oak and virgin European oak. A mix of virgin European, and sometimes we use kind of ex-wine barrels, so they're European oak casks that the cooperage has essentially shaved the inside of the cask to remove the wine, and then expose the virgin wood again, and then they will toast that to our specifications. So create an STR, as they call it, or a NEOC cask, depending on where you get them. And that essentially gives you a very similar to a virgin European oak characteristic. So the difference between American and European oak tends to be your American oak has more, I like to describe them as kind of aromatic, sweet vanilla. You got a lot of the vanilla and coconut cream, custard kind of characteristics. Tends to be very much what I like to describe as the kind of the front end sweeter side of the spectrum of flavors. European oak then just gives you a different level of tannins. So a higher tannin content gives you a kind of a richer, deeper, leatherier characteristic. And it tends to leave really nice, gives you a really nice mouthfeel and spice to the back end of the whiskey. So this is an interesting one because it kind of is, you have a nice mix between the grain, which is kind of butterscotch and very kind of smooth. And then you have this sort of spice from the European oak, and I think that kind of really kind of adds like I said, butterscotch, very smooth sipping whiskey. It's a bit of complexity as well that you don't get from the port cask, which is mostly fruit forward. This is a little bit more challenging, a little bit more interesting.
Wood. But it was my first time to try it with the pot still component. I think for this whiskey, this was totally the right decision. It was always the whiskey from Clonakilty where I was like, okay, that's not my favorite. Yeah. It's okay, but it's not my favorite. But now with the spice of the pot still and then the wood component and then the butterscotch and the vanilla, it's really good.
I think there's a nice balance. Pot still, like, really just added another dimension to it. I think it probably is the one we need to like iterate a little bit more as far as the balancing of the European oak and the pot still, to just try to keep that balance there. The first batch was just a little bit too maybe spice, and we don't want to polarize people too much with flavors that they may not be used to, essentially for the first time. But a little bit of dialing in, a bit of iteration for the next batch or the batch afterwards to adjust those flavors so that they balance really well. Because I think that's what I'm always kind of looking for in a whiskey, is the balance. And I think you can't have a bad whiskey if it's a balanced whiskey. You don't want too much of one thing, you don't want too much of another. For me, I think if you can balance the palate nicely, I think you're onto a winner.
Yeah, definitely. And this is both the port cask and the level oak. For me, these are whiskeys where you can say, yes, blended whiskeys, but these are definitely on another level than any blended whiskey like a Jameson or anything else. The level is much higher. You have much more taste. They are much more complex. It's not like I sit here and drink the bottle because it's so light. No, you really have something to taste. And this one stays really long. I still have the taste So
yeah, the European oak
really
is a fantastic. I just love I love the finish it gives you. Just it kind of just lingers a little bit longer. And again, sometimes, like I said, grain, especially ex-bourbon casks, you get a lot of sweetness, but you don't often get a lot of body. You get nice body from the virgin American oak. You get quite some tannins from that, but I just feel on their own, you need that European oak to kind of just introduce just a little bit of depth to everything. So, and we've always for these are premium blends. I suppose you might describe them as premium blends, compared to the likes of your Jamesons or whatever. Which, don't get me wrong, is a good quality whiskey, but it's just it's designed for a different drinker, shall we say?
Yeah.
Whereas these are designed to kind of so that you can appreciate the components of each. Otherwise, we would have only put 5% of the pot still into it, and it just would have been a grain forward. But we wanted you to be able to taste everything.
Yeah, and you can definitely. So the port cask is 49 euros in Germany, and double oak is also around that. I think a bit cheaper. So yeah, good price, premium blends. And before we go to the pot still, maybe you can also tell a bit about the change of the bottle shape and also where you change the packaging, because I think that's also really interested if you put effort in that.
Yeah, no, that was a massive one, and to be honest with you, it's shout out to the likes of Caroline and Michael. Obviously, have been working really hard on. I think sustainability is going to be a major important factor for distilleries. I mean, we're a big energy consumer. We're a big energy waster in many ways, because the nature of whiskey means that we only recover about 10% of what we put in. That's just the nature of we can't make whiskey any other way. So I think with modern engineering, the technologies, we can reduce our waste as much as possible. And we obviously knew that up until now, our older bottles, I don't have one here behind me, but which I really liked, but it was a kind of essentially an off the shelf bottle that you could buy anywhere. Really, anyone could have the same bottle, and it was a lovely bottle, really kind of heavy and premium, and a lot of people liked it. But we knew, obviously, as we were becoming more established, that a bespoke bottle was obviously always going to be the plan. And so that kind of gave us an opportunity to kind of, okay, if we're going to go bespoke, we're going to tick the other boxes too, which is sustainability and where are we going to source these bottles from? And one of the big considerations is weight. When the weight of a heavy glass bottle, all adds up, and the shipping costs tend to be more, the carbon footprint is more, and you never really think about that when your focus is on the whiskey. But I think small little changes. Also, the bottles are the same size, pretty much same size. They fit into the same carton as a 750, as a 700 ml, which means that you save on. You don't need two different types of bottles for the same product, essentially. So you can sell 750 mils. You can fit them into the same cartons as a 700 without having to buy additional cardboard or additional packaging. And it just kind of gives you the opportunity to reduce waste as much as possible, and as well as kind of introducing something that's bespoke now. It has our branding on it, and it was a big kind of big move, and I think it has made a massive difference to the ease of operations that most consumers won't see or appreciate, but for us really turns. We received Origin Green Gold membership this last year, perhaps, and we're pushing the boundaries constantly to try to increase our sort of sustainability, not just for branding purposes, but really just to try to, because I think in the future distilleries and a lot of companies are going to be forced eventually to do these things. So, and I think we're just going to invest in them now, because I think this is we're looking ahead at the market, and we're kind of saying, okay, consumers will eventually be asking these questions. They're becoming more knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And I think for us here, we just want to have answers to them, and a lot of the things like the materials we use, the label material is recyclable. The glass bottle material is up to 60% recycled, sometimes more. And that has its challenges too. Sometimes the color of the glass can sometimes change depending on how much recycled glass is used in it.
Okay.
But I think that's something a consumer will have no problem with. I personally think so. And I think it also plays into the reality that this is not just something we kind of made up, it's something that's actually real. So, and you might see, that comes with certain challenges, but it's one I think it's worth taking.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a good decision to go with that. And I really like the boxes because you really have just one box for every bottle. And I think it really looks nice. So that was a good decision.
Just the cutout, it just meant that people can see what the difference between the double oak and the pour cask without, again, it's just reducing the need to print two separate things. Like if you can, it's a smart solution to the problem, and I think it satisfies, and also even just reducing the box in certain environments as well. So, for instance, some people like to buy their whiskey in a box if they're going to gift it to someone, but some people don't care. And have that option of being able to kind of go, okay, well, sell it in a box or without a box. And if you can sell it without a box, you're saving potential waste that someone may not care about and they just throw away anyway. So I think kind of if you can minimize your costs into that box, it means you can actually just minimize the waste ultimately. So it's great to see them that they actually think that way and think ahead. And I think it's
like Julia says, it's good that you do on an early stage a solution and then wait until the pressure of the market. So
I think you definitely see now the market's already. We just know and it's even cost. I mean, between energy crisis and COVID and everything. I mean, distilleries are very expensive at the best of times, but the energy that is required to make whiskey is very high, and it makes sense in every perspective to save money, to save resources, to minimize the risk of essentially being. And we look at all sorts of solutions. We're currently looking at a solution to treat our wastewater or effluent, so that we can kind of so that we can treat it in a way that's kind of sustainable and also solves two problems. One problem is how do you get rid of wastewater? Usually up until now, you treat it and you send it into the municipal supply, and then it's treated, which again is energy and there's a cost associated with that. Whereas there's other solutions like anaerobic digesters, which essentially could create energy source from biomethane, everything like that. So we're looking at every possibility really of kind of offsetting our footprint.
And the customer always says it's more important what's in the bottle than around packaging.
Exactly. I think that is important. I mean, up until recently, everyone said that the bottle was, people do the sort of the average consumer might make a decision off of the bottle, but ultimately they'll come back to the whiskey because of the liquid, and that's the important thing.
Before we go to the pots, though, we have one more question, and it's from Tina. She's asking if you're going to do more beer cask finishes.
Yeah, definitely. We have a few sitting in stock for a while, actually. Beer cask finishes had a kind of a big jump up in popularity, I suppose, after the likes of Jameson Cask Mates and those other kind of releases were very popular. But we found that a lot of the beer finishes didn't improve the whiskey, in my personal opinion, a lot of other people. And we weren't just going to release something just because it's interesting or different. It has to work. And for me, a stout is still the quintessential kind of works the best with anything too hoppy or IPA cask finishes. Like I think you're just really just selling it for the sake of something different. I've yet to talk to someone who really loves the IPA or the hop character, I just don't think those terpenes work with Irish whiskey particularly well. So we do have a few beer casks in storage at the moment, which we will eventually release. They're just kind of sitting there at the moment. We've got there won't be major batches. A couple of collaborations with breweries in the US every now and again, but I'm not sure where they usually are collaborations with America. So most of the bottles end up back in America. We have done beer collaborations with O'Hara's in the past, which has been successful, and I think we will look to recreate that and create that kind of a running skew with that. The problem is sourcing beer casks can sometimes be tricky because the brewery doesn't always need cask finished whiskey, in fact, or cask finished beer. In fact, there's not much of a market for cask finished beer in Ireland. So it means that we have more use for their casks than they have use for our casks, essentially. So they'd be essentially making a beer just for us, essentially, to flavor the cask rather than any benefit to them, because 200-liter cask of beer, they would struggle to sell for Irish market, probably more in America and Europe or whatever. But for here, I think they struggle to. Not many people enjoy the flavor of a really strong
beer,
whiskey finish kind of beer.
Yeah.
So it can be difficult to try to get casks consistently. And that's why essentially I think Jameson bought a brewery specifically to give them the consistent supply, whereas we don't have that luxury. So
yeah. Okay. So I have one more tip for you. So Dennis is a big Clonakilty fan. So he's really into your whiskeys. I think he has nearly every of your whiskeys. And he says, if it might be that you have produced something bad, you should pack it in a really nice packaging, sell it as a limited edition, really expensive, and then just the collectors can buy it.
Yeah, exactly, and never be open, so they'll never know. They'll never know.
They'll never know what it was.
Yeah, no, you can. That's why I don't collect. I don't collect rare whiskeys, because I'm almost certain that's usually how it works. My thoughts is every now and again you see Scotch distilleries releasing 54-year-old whiskey or 45-year-old whiskey or whatever. And part of me thinks that there must have been something seriously wrong with that whiskey that they left it in a warehouse for 50 years, Yeah. Usually that's because, let's face it, the whiskey that they were making 50 years ago was probably not as refined as the stuff we're making today. Yeah. And it needed 50 years to I honestly think that I think
this is why I like to talk about Irish grain whiskey, because we often have grain bottlings with 10 years, 5 years or anything, and the Scotch is always over 20 years. And I always say the Irish people can do it better.
Yeah.
You don't have to leave it as long as the Scotch people in the cask.
Well, I will be very I'll be very critical now of and I do enjoy a Scotch occasionally, but I will be quite critical that a lot of the way that the Scottish industry has been making whiskey for a long time is very 19th century technology in most cases, that they're afraid to change because it will alter the flavor. But my opinion personally is that if they had the technology in the 19th century to make clean whiskey that will mature quicker, they would have done it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think the whiskey that we're producing in Ireland, because of our sort of rebirth, shall we say, into whiskey, which focuses more on quality control, consistency, with the exception of the occasional time where we might make our cuts a little bit wider to add a little bit more character. But generally, like, we're concerned with making the cleanest and most high quality new make that goes into the cask, so that we don't have to worry. We don't have any doubts that in 3 years' time that's going to be good quality whiskey. Yeah. Whereas if you put crap in, you're going to get crap out. That's the way whiskey works. The cask can only do so much, and you will have to leave it for 40 years in order for it to do anything. And even then, you could be very disappointed. You spent thousands on a 40-year-old whiskey, and it could actually not be particularly nice.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but when you say clean you make, maybe we should go to the last whiskey, to the pot still
Yeah.
whiskey, and I think we start introducing it with a little video.
Okay.
So here we are again with the new Clonakilty single pot still whiskey. So the first own release. Yeah, the first time I had the bottle in my hand was like, wow. Now, not the end of the journey, but a very big mark of the journey of the distillery. From the start, where I was climbing in the distillery, where it was under construction, and now I have the bottle of whiskey in my hand. It's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's a big, like you said, it's, I think everything's been leading up to that point when a distillery has its own liquid. And obviously we've been playing around with our own liquid up until now. Like obviously incorporating it into the blends was a big decision. But obviously with the first single pot still 100% our own liquid is a kind of a big milestone. Like there's only a handful of distilleries really in Ireland that are now part of that group of people producing their own whiskey. And I think that's a great, but it really is like so much for the last 5 years has been getting to this point. And now I think we realize now that a new threshold has been kind of passed where it's like, okay, this is only the beginning now. It's only really now that you get to begin the process of being a full-fledged kind of distillery and producing a product, because whiskey just doesn't, it's not something that happens overnight. So up until now, it's hard to believe, how much has gone on in the last 5 years to get this to this point. But then we're starting to realize now it's like, okay, now it really, the fun begins,
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So, single pots of whiskey, 5 years old, matured in 3 different casks. Maybe you can tell us where it has been matured.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a story behind this one. I think I joined the distillery 2 years ago, almost to the month. And when I joined, there had been very, very early kind of discussions about, like, they knew the release was 2 years away, but 2 years feels like an eternity. A lot of the times it's flown by in reality, and it's probably very little time. I would have preferred an extra year, to be honest with you, to just plan and get sourced the casks, and because you really have to, like when I came in, one of the first discussions I had, I sat down with Michael, the founder, and a couple of the directors, and just kind of were just like, okay, what direction do you want to go with this? Because up until that point, it was a blank slate. It was, like I said, about 90% of all the casks filled were ex-bourbon barrels, which is great from me because that means I have a blank slate. I can play around with things, but it means I have to move that liquid into other casks in order to create any kind of product. So I knew in my head having tasted the whiskey, having familiarized myself with the flavor profile of what was maturing, I kind of knew what I wanted, and I'm kind of happy that they kind of gave me a kind of the green light to go ahead with it. So I knew I kind of wanted a sherry component, but because I'm a massive fan of sherry, and the reason is the diversity of the group of wines that make up that blanket term sherry, and so. I hate when people describe a whiskey as a sherry finish, because I just want to know, like, well, what type of sherry? There's any number of sherries where you get such a spectrum of flavors. So when we decided sherry was going to be and I experimented, obviously, PX and Oloroso, like I was familiar with both types, and knew the flavors that I could expect from them. I knew Oloroso would feature in some way. I think it was for the first batch, because of the limited time I had, like at this stage, probably a year and a half. We knew, okay, we'll source a bit of everything, and we'll fill everything, and we'll kind of see what works over the next 6 months. And so we filled a bit of PX, we filled a bit of Oloroso, and we filled a bit of Moscatel, Paulo Cortado, Amontillado. We pretty much filled Fino. We filled the whole spectrum of sherries to see what worked best. And I think we were shocked. It was not a clear winner. We thought PX and Oloroso would be a safe bet. And it just, in the end, it was nice, but it just didn't do what we wanted it to. It wasn't, for me, it was just not, it was too safe, maybe. It was a little bit too, I didn't want, the last thing I wanted was a kind of a redbreast knockoff, or an attempt to there's a reason, pot still sherry influence is a kind of a classic flavor profile. It's something I wanted to pay homage to without trying to copy the redbreast kind of, I didn't want to be compared to them. Not that it isn't a great kind of standard to set, but I kind of wanted something unique. And when we tasted all the different casks that we filled, a limited amount of each, Amontillado just jumped out at us. It was incredible. A dry style sherry. It was almost one of the driest it's one step up from a fino. So my expectation was a dry sherry would be the least sweet and would give us the least safe note, shall we say. I would have thought that maybe at best it would have been a small blending component that would have added some character to the whiskey. But what we were finding actually is that the sweetness from the Amontillado was more intense and had a nicer balanced profile than what was coming out of the Oloroso at the time. Now I know Oloroso is slightly more sweet, but it's still considered a dry sherry as well. But we just found that the Amontillado worked perfect with our spirit. Salted caramel, like the caramel toffee notes. It was amazing. So we made that decision at the time. Now we didn't have enough Amontillado filled to make that the actual core.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to use some of the Oloroso to kind of create. It was the closest in that wine that we'd filled to Amontillado, and they work quite well together. So that's the story behind that. I think for the next batches, I'm going to be a bit braver and maybe push more towards the Amontillado and kind of have that be the dominant flavor profile. Because I just think that having tasted that single cask or the couple of casks that we filled, it's so much more interesting, so much more kind of complex. And anyone who's tasted, we took a sample of it to Whiskey Live last year, just to kind of gauge opinion. And most people hadn't heard of Amontillado; they had no clue what it was. And I think that put some people off, but most people just all agreed that the flavor was amazing. So finally, I think kind of a year and a half, maybe just over a year of a finish, shall we say, in those casks, offered just enough fantastic color, as you can see from the bottle. Like considering about 40% of that blend, maybe a little bit more, was a sherry component, and the rest being ex-bourbon. It's just amazing the color that's come out of those casks. So it was, playing around with the blend ratios and everything took a long time. Took the last year of agonizing over the ratios and how it would work, and then finally settling on this. I think it's really happy with it as a benchmark to kind of grow into the next few years. And remember, like, it's a difficult one deciding on casks to fill, because you know that you don't have a whole lot of play when you fill a cask type for a particular product. You don't know really you have a good idea about how it's going to turn out, but if it works, it's almost worse than if it doesn't work, because if it works, it means you have to have batch 2 ready. So it means you have to commit. You have to commit to that. So you have to have an idea in mind, and you have to commit. So like I filled the next 5 batches of this, so before you even release the first one. So you kind of have to know. You iterate slowly, because you don't have the luxury of just, especially at our scale, like it's different if you're just releasing a single cask of this or single cask of that. But when we're releasing larger scale, like we want people to be able to buy this whiskey conveniently and not have to wait endlessly for the next batch, you know.
Yeah.
So it has challenges regarding that, and there's a bit of risks involved in committing so much into an idea that may not pay off. But I think so far feedback's been great, and we're really happy with how it's gone, and I'm personally happy with how the flavors are working. I think it really, for 4 or 5-year-old whiskey, I think it's really holding up well against other first releases, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And as you are here on a German live stream, in the chat, they are already talking about a German single cask release. Okay. So you shouldn't talk too much about separate components who work really well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think that's one of those things we definitely. I think if anyone's in Clonakilty at any time, just ask. I might see if I can get the samples of that, because it's probably that one cask I've sampled probably a million times at this stage. It's probably.
Yeah, but I think for the future, we definitely can talk about single casks for Irish whiskies for the German market here. And yeah, what I think is that what I really like is you did a small competition to win the bottle of the Clonakilty first release, but for your official first release, you choose a price, you choose a big amount of bottles. It is sold here for 55 euros. So I think it's a really good price component for a first release for a 5-year-old whiskey. You could go with 46%. So I think it's really good that, yeah,
no, I think
that you choose a bit bigger.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, the price is a massive one. I think people would kind of, we debated that for a while. A lot of people were releasing their first whiskies at 200 euros, 120, 150 euros. And I just think the market 5 years ago could handle that. But nowadays, no, there's no real market for that. You know, people aren't willing to, they want to keep their money. They want value for money. And I think for us, the inaugural release, which was, like you said, a lottery, 460 bottles were filled. Only 300 went in the lottery, and the rest were kind of given to kind of investors and staff and things like that. So there'll never be more than 460 bottles. But even then, with the people who got an opportunity to buy that bottle, it was still only 120 euros, which I think is, for a first release at such a limited offering. Like, there's a lot of people releasing their core whiskey at 120 euros, which I think is too high for those things. And I think that we want, like I said before, the big thing that, you know, I take pride in as a blender and sort of working on a product like this, is that it's a core product that's going to be consistent, that's going to be able to be bought in a shop. You know, for a distillery our size, we're not massive. We're certainly not the scale of Middleton or any of the other distilleries. And I think it's a real challenge for us to kind of sit on a shelf alongside those whiskies. In a similar way, a lot of smaller distilleries rely totally on unique appeal to sell whiskey, sort of like one-off single casks or limited batches or whatever. Whereas we're kind of throwing down the gauntlet and saying, okay, we can produce, you know, nowhere near the scale that the bigger boys can do, but we can match the quality, we can match the consistency, and we can match the price point to the best that we can. And I think, you know, if someone has 60 euros or 55 euros to spend on a whiskey, you know, we want them to be able to, like, look at the offerings on the shelf and kind of go, okay, do you know what, I'm going to keep coming back to this Clonakilty because it's affordable. It's something that is really good quality. It's consistent, and I think that's what we kind of wanted to go with. I think everyone mentioned the price as being like a major, and I think it's a major seller in more ways than one. Just to be able to kind of reduce the price point, I think people really appreciate it because they just have gotten used to first releases just being ridiculously expensive, and no one's able to get them, or no one's able to buy them. But I think this is definitely the right decision.
Great. So we have one last question. Torsten is asking, since when you are producing single malt whiskey, because you won Best Irish Single Malt new make?
Yeah, so our first single malt up until now, I mean, Clonakilty has always been 100% focused on single pot still. But one of the decisions we made this time last year, was to make single malt a very limited run. Essentially, all that is to do is to replace what we are currently sourcing. We're of the opinion that if we can make it ourselves, we should make it ourselves. I personally like the feeling of being able to control the quality, being able to control the consistency. And I think we've proven, well, winning that Best New Make Award was kind of proof that, no matter what we make, we can make it good quality or whatever. So single malt, I think, is a really interesting, we make like a tiny fraction of production goes into single malt. It will literally be enough to supplement our current single malt, Galley Head single malt, and in the future, maybe in 5 years' time, and no more. It'll be kind of our main focus is going to be single pot still. But I just felt that we were leaving a lot on the table by not making our own single malt, and I think there's a certain amount of the market is still obsessed with single malt. We're hoping that people will buy into the single pot still category and really understand it and kind of and appreciate it. But a certain amount of single malt is always a nice thing for any distillery to have, and I think I'm kind of really looking forward to seeing how that turns out in a couple of years.
Great. Thanks a lot. It was really interesting. I appreciate that you are going forward with single pots of whiskey, because I think that's the Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
It is something where we really have to focus on, where we should look into the future. So I was really looking forward to your single pots of whiskey, and I personally really like it. So thanks a lot for taking your time talking about the whiskeys and the distillery. It was really interesting. And I'm sure there will be Germans coming over visiting the distillery in summer. So they can try the whiskeys there.
No, absolutely. Anyone, beautiful place, beautiful distillery. I'm sure most of your listeners probably have already been to Ireland at some stage, but it's well worth the trip down if anyone's in the area.
Yeah, great. So thanks a lot. So we have a holiday tomorrow in Germany. So I wish everybody a nice holiday tomorrow. And I wish you a nice rest of the week. And thanks a lot.
No problem, Marika. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.